Hello everyone, how you doing today? I'm Steve G for Steve G Fishing, and welcome to another one of my videos. In today's video, we're gonna go ahead and fish crankbaits in cold weather. So the title of this fishing video is gonna be Cold Weather Crankbait Fishing. So let's go ahead and get started on the video. I strongly recommend that when you're fishing crankbaits in deep water, you're going to look for lures that have the bills that are going to be long like this. This particular model here will go down to 12 foot, 1 to 12 foot. It has that long bill, so when you're reeling it in, it's going to go down really deep. Now, if you don't want to go that depth, you want to go a little bit shallower, look at the lip. If the lip is a little bit smaller, this particular model will go down to 1 to 9 foot. Each lip, the longer the lip is, the deeper the lure is going to go. The shorter the lip, the shallower the lure is going to go. I strongly recommend that you don't stay above the 5 foot mark. You want to stay more in the 10 foot to the 15 foot mark, because those bass are going to want to go deep when that weather starts coming in. And I'm talking like weather where it gets in the 50s and the 40s. Those bass don't want to be near the surface, and they don't want to be in the shallow areas. So they're going to start hitting the deeper water. So let's go into my first diagram. Now, on my first diagram here, I strongly recommend that hit the locks. Locks are a very, very important area for catching bass. Those bait fish on these locks are going to be hanging close to these walls, because these locks are going to be open and they're letting water come through, and the water is going to be a lot warmer than the natural lake or river water is going to be. So those bait fish are going to be hanging around the edge of these walls, and they're going to be hanging where that water is the warmest. Now, the locks are good because the water is going to be deep around these locks. So you want to cast those lures close to those walls and reel them in anywhere from the wall all the way out to the middle. If the water is gushing out of here, all means, throw that lure close to that wall and hit those strong depths. And if you look at your graph, you're going to see those bait fish hanging in these deep water areas. Another thing to keep in mind is if there's boats on the other side of these locks, and Lake Okeechobee is really popular for this, they have the locks where the boats are on the other side, and as soon as they open it up, that water is coming down, and those bait fish will be right there where that water's coming through, and those bass will be hanging out right there where that water's coming through, and those are really good ambush spots for catching bass. So if you have locks in your area, hit those locks, because a lot of times that water's going to be a lot warmer than what it's going to be when you're fishing in the lakes during that cold weather. So hit the locks if you get a chance. Let's go to my next diagram. Now, the other place you want to hit are the canals. The canals, the nice thing about the canals, it's going to be shallow, right there on the bank line. I strongly recommend that you throw your lures to the shoreline of the canal and bring those lures toward you to where the lures are dropping off to the 5, to the 10, the 15, and 20 foot mark. If you look at your graphs, you're going to find those bait fish, a lot of times they're going to be between the 10 to the 15 foot mark during the cold weather. Those bait fish are going to attract those bass, and those bass are going to be waiting on the sidelines for those bait fish to come into their ambush spots. So I strongly recommend that you cast those lures on the edge of those canals and bring them out into that deeper water. Once you find that comfort zone area where those bass are hanging out at, and then you can start casting your lure sideways and working into those depths. But if you don't know, cast to the shallow and work your way out to the deeper water until you find that comfort zone where those bass are hanging out at. Canals are a real good spot for cold weather fishing because the water is really shallow near the shoreline and it tapers down quickly into deeper water. So don't boat out the canals. If you got canals in those areas, hit those canals, and I'm sure you'll find the bass in those areas as well. Let's go to my next diagram. Now, on lakes, and you're going to be fishing lakes, if you're doing tournaments, you're going to be hitting a lot of lakes. And it's very important when you're cruising around these lakes, you want to look for where your points are. The points are very crucial on lakes because the bass will use these areas here on this side as an ambush going into the deep water, or they'll use this side as an ambush going into the deep water. There might be a sandbar in here. I have had many a times where I've fished on points and there'll be a sandbar right in here and those bass will be hanging right off that sandbar, and I'll cast my lure close to that shoreline on that point and reel out until I get into that deep water, and I'll end up bouncing somewhere in that sandbar, and those bass will be staying in that one particular spot. Look at your graph when you get to these points. It's going to taper off quick. You want to look for the points that taper off with the shelves where it goes into deep water. Hit those points, find out where the bait fish are at. The bait fish are a lot of times they're going to be in the 10-foot mark, or they're going to be in the 15-foot to 20-foot mark. You find those bait fish, the bass aren't going to be far behind. But cast those lures and work them out down those shelves until you find that strike zone area, and then you can start casting sideways because you have an idea where those bass are hanging out at. So remember, on the lakes, you want to hit the points. The points are really important on these lakes, and they're going to help you find those bass a little bit better. Let's go to the next diagram. Now, on this diagram here, you want to fish the bridges. If you're not familiar with the bridges, where the pylons are, if the water has a current coming through, the bass are going to be hanging right on these walls of these pylons. As that water's coming through, the bait fish are coming through too, and those bass are going to be right on those walls, and they're waiting for an ambush to get those bait fish. If you look at your pylon walls, if you got a current coming through, you'll see that water going in a spiral position, and those bass know that there's no current coming through there, and it's nice and calm right there. So as those bait fish are coming through, those bass are going to zip right out of that calm area and ambush those bait fish. When you're in the canals, cast in the middle of the canal. The water's going to be very deep there in the middle of the canal because that's where the boats are going in and out. hit those canals. That water most likely going to be in the 20-foot, even maybe the 50-foot mark. But hit the center of that bridge for that deep water. And over here, as you get closer to the shoreline of those pylons, that water is going to get shallower, and it's most likely going to be in the 10 to the 15-foot mark. So when you're out there fishing those canals, throw those lures underneath those bridges and reel them in fast and get into that deep water. And you want to use those lures like I showed you, and I'll show you again, that have the deep bills on them. The longer these bills are, the deeper these lures are going to go. And you want to stay with the lures that show some kind of a fish resemblance. This particular model I'm showing you is a shad, and that's made by Rapala Lures. Very, very good lure, very effective. But it mixes in with the bait, and the bass love those shad. Another one you want to stay with is, this is another Rapala as well, and this is a minnow. And as you can see with the white and the black, and it's got a long bill on there as well, and that mimics and shows you that it's a bait fish as well. You want to find lures that look like bait fish, and you want to cast them into these deep areas. When you're fishing in the winter months, it's going to be cold out, and those bass are going to look for that deeper water to where they're in their comfort zone. Now, if you don't want to use the crankbaits, I strongly recommend you throw a rattle trap. A rattle trap is really good for working in these deep areas as well. You can clean house on a rattle trap. A rattle trap will put a lot of fish in the boat. But for crankbaits, you want to fish those deeper areas, because when you get into the 50 to 40 foot, you get the 50 degree temperature to the 40 degree temperature, those bass are going to start going down deep, and you're going to want to look for deep areas, and that's where you're going to hold the fish at. Look at your graphs. You'll see your graphs that are going to, when you're looking at the graph, it's going to show those bait fish that are going to be in the 20-foot or the 30-foot mark. Now, once you find those bait fish, throw your lures out there, run them through the bait fish, and if you're getting strikes in a, let's say this is 10 foot, then you can start throwing your lures sideways. But I strongly recommend that you throw out and hit the deep water first, because bass get really sluggish when it gets cold out, and they want to go to that deeper water to where they're in their comfort zone. Well, try these tips. I think these tips will help you put more fish in the boat, and stick to the diagrams that I showed you, and get out there and fill your boat. Remember, the colder the weather, the deeper the fish are going to keep going. So get those crankbaits, throw them out there, and find those fish. I'm Steve G for Steve G Fishing. God bless, and I hope to see you on my next video.